If you don't know me, I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and the CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. We're really excited to have you all here. As you know, our mission here at the Exec Club is to be the nexus of the Chicagoland business community. We are the convener that brings everyone together to connect, learn, and grow, and events like this are the hallmark of what we do. I want to extend a very warm welcome to the esteemed members of our board of directors and council of advisors who are here with us. Thank you all for being here at this event. Your leadership is greatly appreciated. And I want to thank all of our Signature Series sponsors. As you can tell, we have many organizations that are involved with the club who believe in our mission, and we quite literally cannot do any of these events without them. So thank you all so much for everything that you do. And I also want to thank all of our members who are here today. You'll notice the members, they have a member ribbon. If you're ever interested in joining our community and learning more about membership, feel free to talk to any of them. And so that's it for remarks. So now I'm going to introduce my good friend and incredible leader in Chicago, Brad Henderson. He is the CEO of P33, also the moderator for today's conversation, and handing it over to him, who will tell you more about the conversation and our panelists.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Margaret, thank you so much to you and your amazing team for what you do, and it's a real honor to be here. And I have some complicated news for all of you. Margaret and I have already agreed this is about emerging technologies, and no one can leave today until you successfully pass a quiz at the end about synthetic biology, quantum computing, and battery chemistry. And so if you need to start studying, you're allowed to break out your textbooks. I guess they're online now. But we're going to talk about the hardest topics in science and how we make them part of how Illinois succeeds. So really grateful that you've decided to come spend some time in our physics, chemistry, and biology class with us. I just wanted to start by saying I think we're at Illinois in a really exciting time. And if you just pick up the paper the past week, we've added a $2 billion battery plant just outside of Chicago, and today a $200 million synthetic biology company in Glenview and the old Allstate facility. And so that, to me, gets me excited. We also have a lot of challenges, and I think the opportunity for all of the leaders on stage that I'm very lucky to get to hear from and learn from, and from all of you, I think it's only by working together that we can actually really spin the incredible assets that Illinois and Chicago has into a winning strategy, and I think it's kind of up to us. And so that's what makes this conversation so promising. So I was just going to go, I love each of the three panelists we have here. I think they are leaders in their own right in Illinois. And I'll start with Dean Bashir, and just start by saying, and we'll kind of have each of you introduce yourself, and I'll start by just saying, tell me a little bit more about your journey and what brings you here to Illinois and the role that you have, and what that means for sort of where Illinois is headed.
Great, thank you, Brad. I hope you can hear me okay. I want to thank you for your leadership and partnership, and also thank you, Margaret, for having this event. So let's see, how far do I go back? So I'm the Dean of the Granger College of Engineering at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Really humbled and proud to be in that role. So in terms of journey, I mean, I'm an immigrant. I came here at 15 with my brother, it's a long story, with just a year of money. Just to find our way, and anyway, here we are. So we'll talk about the in-between maybe some other time. But I'm like I said, I couldn't have ever imagined that I'll be in this position that I'm in. And I think in academia, and I think in all positions of this type, it's about service. Leadership is about service and really impacting the community and doing things for others. So I know in our college and our campus, and in higher ed, that's what we strongly believe in. So I've been at Illinois for 15 years. I was at Purdue before that, just a few cornfields over. Another great school. Also, we compete and collaborate. It's the nature of the world. But I think we need to collaborate more. We need to work together more across the region, across the Midwest, because there's just so many exciting things going on. And I'm here now. Just finished my first 5 years as the dean, started the next 5 years, and hopefully we'll talk about some of the exciting things that are going on.
Great, thank you. And I will also say, just a fascinating relationship with Chicago. In addition to being a prominent professor in Urbana, you even have a biotech startup growing here very quickly in Chicago. So you're sort of showing how the pieces can fit together in Illinois.
Thank you.
Jimmy, again, same question. Tell us about your journey and how it brought you to the position you're in today, leading LanzaJet.
Thanks for having me, and it's great to be here. I will go back in the journey a little bit because I think it's helpful because I am a big believer in the power of public and private collaboration, public and private sector collaboration. And I think that goes back to my origins in terms of where I started my career. And I think it's helpful to talk through that a little bit because I see the future of what we're doing here in the state and in the city requiring us working together across sectors and across industries to really capture the opportunity that we have. I started my career actually as an intern in the White House. So as a 19-year-old, I was in the West Wing of the White House, privileged to see the world from a very specific vantage point. It really shapes how you view people, how you view international issues, domestic issues, all those types of things. And also sort of created a desire for me to have a broader impact in our community, whether that's a national community, international, or even local. I followed that up by actually coming back to Chicago and working for Mayor Daley and spent a couple of years supporting our economic revitalization efforts. Some of you may remember a program called Neighborhoods Alive, which was trying to create the near north and the near west and all sorts of different communities by infusing economic development in those neighborhoods. One of my projects when I worked there was actually the riverfront in Chicago. Back then in 1997, it was dilapidated. We had a significant homeless population that lived down there, and we didn't have any economic activity on the riverfront. And it started a long time ago to sort of start to think about how do you bring this back to life? How do you rejuvenate the areas that have so much potential? I shifted to a private sector career with a company called Booz Allen in Hamilton, where I did a lot of my work, again, at the intersection of public and private sectors. Some of my first clients were major oil companies like Mobil Oil and ExxonMobil as they merged. At the same time, I did work in sustainability. My client at the same time as I had Mobil was also the Everglades National Park. So I always found a way to tap into the passion that I had, which was how do we address big issues that are facing us. So fast forward to where we are today. I'm the CEO of a company called LanzaJet, where we take raw material, convert it into ethanol, and from ethanol we make sustainable drop-in fuels. Sectors like aviation have promised to decarbonize, to get to net zero by 2050. You can do that any number of ways, but the lever that aviation as an industry has identified is actually drop-in sustainable fuels. So if you backtrack again 15 years at this point, I was with United Airlines. We actually led an effort which was called the Midwest Aviation Sustainable Biofuels Initiative, MASB. It brought together 50 organizations across the state and across the region to figure out how do we do this? How do we create a new industry in the Midwest? How do we start to create value, break down issues across value chains? And we've been at it for a long time. So I started doing this work 15 years ago, and here we are building our first refinery in Georgia. We have a refinery that we're planning here in the state of Illinois, but it's taken a lot of collaboration across public and private sectors to break down all sorts of barriers to be successful. We still have a long ways to go, and I think Illinois in particular has so much potential, and Chicago as a geography has an incredible amount of value that can bring to companies like ours into the industry. So I'm excited about the conversation today and looking forward to it.
Great, thank you. And I would just say LanzaJet, and I'm part of the fan club, is one of those stories we all should be rooting for. The idea of really finding a way to solve our carbon and fuel challenges with this cool technology in the heart of Illinois is something that I think could be a massive success story for all of us. So then, last but not least, all of us are residents and citizens of Illinois, and one of them is that and an elected official really in charge of setting the agenda for our state. And so, Susana, thank you so much for joining us. I wonder if you could start by just getting a bit of an overview of where we are as a state, and paint that picture for us. Maybe as you do that, talk a little bit about how public-private partnership will be essential for moving us forward. And then, what are the kinds of things we're going to have to put on the table, the kinds of areas we're going to have to invest, the kind of areas we're going to have to collaborate if we want to realize our full potential?
Sure. Well, thank you, Brad. And first of all, to all of you, thank you for showing up today, right? Because otherwise it'd be super awkward with us talking to ourselves. I said that to a couple people earlier, but no, we really do appreciate it. And it's a true honor for me to be here with the Exec Club here in Chicago and with this panel, which is pretty amazing and humbling, frankly. So these are some of the top talent that we have in our state. And let me just say that to get into the context of Illinois, Illinois is a state that is so rich in resources. So we're definitely not a resource poor state. We've got the best institutions of higher learning. We've got the best national labs right here with Argonne and Fermilab, with people like Dr. Bashir. We've got innovation coming through every pore of our city and our state. You see Jimmy right here to my left. We have a skilled workforce that is being pumped out of our universities, and not just through traditional methods of educating our workforce, but also with upskilling them, right? With teaching them new ways of doing new and emerging jobs in those technology spaces or emerging sector spaces. We have so many wonderful things, including a strategic location that I think beats any other in the country. Right in the middle of the country, and right here in Chicago, we're the only city in the nation that has every single rail running through it. We've got O'Hare International Airport, which is the busiest airport now in the world, and not to mention other airports and infrastructure, intermodal like no one else has. And we are not the land of rolling blackouts or hurricanes, and we're not going to fall into the ocean, not even Lake Michigan, right? So all of those things help to, showcase how much of a resource-rich state we are. What we haven't had, though, is fiscal stability or predictability for decades. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a major problem, but a problem that today, as I look out at that weather and it's so beautiful, it reminds me of our finances today in the state of Illinois. And so while Brad started off by saying that it's going to be a lesson in biology and chemistry and engineering, it's also going to be a little education on finance, because I think it's really important to know where we were, how far we've come, and where we're going most importantly, right? Because the work that I've done as your state controller over the last 6.5 years has been to get Illinois ready for its growth spurt. All of the other pieces of that, incredible puzzle are there. What we didn't have was fiscal stability or predictability, and we've now had that for going on close to 3 years, solidly for over 2 years. And to give you a little bit of context, I inherited the worst fiscal crisis in the history of the state of Illinois. I walked into this job in December of 2016 in the middle of a 736-day budget impasse, which meant that there was no legal appropriation for paying the state's bills. I had to navigate through an almost $17 billion backlog of unpaid bills. So essentially, our state turned every single vendor who did business with us, whether it was a contractor or a social service provider, into an unwilling lender to the state of Illinois. We racked up, besides that $16.7 billion backlog of unpaid bills, I also had to pay down over $1 billion in late payment interest penalties because we were such deadbeats on paying our bills. And there was no business who would naturally look at Illinois back then and think this is a good place to do business. It was the worst place in the country to do business because you had no predictability and stability. Back in 2017, I championed a bond deal that would have allowed us to refinance a big chunk of that a big chunk of the unpaid bills that we were paying 12% interest on, right? That $1 billion came because of a 12% penalty on paying our bills late. We were able to refinance $6 billion of that at a 3.5% rate. So that deal, which I'm really proud to have championed, even though Governor Rauner at the time was very vocally against it, but we managed to get it done. It saved taxpayers between $4 and $6 billion. But here's where the financial turnaround came. With that $6 billion, I targeted every single bill that would give me a federal match of 50 cents at the time. And we turned $6 billion into $9 billion of debt repayment. So we chopped that bill backlog by $9 billion, like within a matter of 2 to 3 months. That's the same formula that I have really utilized in terms of maximizing federal matching dollars, which, believe it or not, controllers prior to me did not take advantage of, and it's literally leaving billions on the table. So we're doing just a better use of how we're leveraging your taxpayer dollar without asking you to pay more, which I think is critical in good governance. Now, fast forward a few years, similar methodologies, every single financial tool available at my disposal that I utilized, as well as pass legislation as a former legislator, because you may not know that I did serve in the General Assembly for 11 years prior to becoming city clerk of Chicago and then getting elected as controller. That legislative experience was key because it taught me what those intersections are like between the public sector and the private sector, and more importantly, how to get things done when you see a problem. And for those of you who may know me, you will agree that when I tell you that there is nothing that I love more than a big, fat, delicious plate of juicy problems that I get to sink my teeth into and wipe clean, right? And so as a former legislator, I was able to identify that there was a major problem in how the state's chief fiscal officer had very little to no visibility of what was being charged to the state's credit account. And you would think that how's that possible? Because any CFO, their key job is to manage the finances and to make sure that we're not spending more than we have coming in. But believe it or not, I was flying blind that first week on the job. I couldn't actually see the extent of our finances, which means I couldn't report them to you or to the press or to the legislature. And I had to pass legislation that would allow me much greater transparency when it came to what was being charged to the state's accounts. And so without getting too much further into the weeds, these key changes were absolutely critical to the financial turnaround that we get to talk about today. And so once I could figure out where the bills were, where they were being hidden, how long they had been sitting there, some of them 2 years, I was able to then craft a plan of attack on paying them down as quickly as possible. And I was able to bring down that bill backlog from $16.7 billion to under $3 billion in 2021. And I did it before receiving a penny of federal ARPA stimulus dollars into the state's coffers. So I tell you this because there's still a lot of misinformation out there about, oh, well, of course Illinois is doing better financially. They got a boatload of money from the federal government. We did, and we needed every penny of that to deal with the new bills that were unexpected related to COVID, right? But clearly, if you just follow simple logic, and I know we have a room full of smart people here, if I had actually used COVID funds to pay down existing debts from before COVID, I'd still be billions in the hole related to COVID. So I tell you this because it's important that everybody leave here today understanding that Illinois is in a complete turnaround position right now. I no longer have a backlog of unpaid bills. We now have a working accounts payable of $1.5 billion today. The normal cost of running government in Illinois is about $3 to $3.5 billion. So we're well under our normal daily operating costs. I have 0 bills that are generating late payment interest penalties right now because we've paid those down too. And more importantly, the day I walked into office, I inherited a 210-day business delay on paying bills in this state. Imagine having to wait 9.5 months to get paid on average. Some people waited 2 years. Today, my oldest bill is 14 days old. We're paying faster than the private sector. And that has been consistent now for over 2 years. It's not a flash in the pan. It is work that has been recognized by the credit rating agencies to the extent that we've received 8 credit upgrades on my watch compared to 8 credit downgrades in the 2 years before I was elected, and only 21 years worth of credit downgrades before taking office. So we've really turned around the state's finances in a way that I am now really touring Illinois to, number one, thank businesses for staying in our state. Thank you. Like any of you that are business leaders here, which is everyone pretty much, thank you for not giving up on the state of Illinois. And thank you for hopefully leaving today understanding that this financial turnaround is real, and it was all done not to be able to say to you, look, we paid down $16.7 billion and we're paying faster than ever, but to say, what does that mean? And what that means is that businesses, for the first time in decades, can look at Illinois as a place where they can trust to do business, at a place that is ready. It has all the other elements, the resource richness that we have, plus a stable and predictable financial future. This is the key to success in growth. And I would certainly rather see our state grow its way into success versus tax its way into subpar performance. That's where we're at today. Now, the benefit of having these public-private partnerships, I'll just give you one example that I think will resonate certainly with this crowd, and it's just coincidental. But when I was a state rep, I also, back in the Mayor Daley days, was appointed by the mayor to serve on a working group that was the vision of Miles White, the president of Abbott. And it was to showcase the city of Chicago as a global place for biotechnology and life sciences. Now, right now, we don't question that. Of course, we're a leader in the biotech space and life sciences. But 20 years ago, not so much. We were emerging in these technologies. And so being a part of that working group was to have, for the very first time, the first international biotech conference come right here to the city of Chicago and showcase the resources that we had and the leadership under Mayor Daley. Now, we were able to work with people like the state of Illinois' governor's office, right? Jack Lavin was the director of DCO back in those days. Bob Westover was involved as well. We had Abbott, Baxter, and pretty much, Argonne, Fermilab, all of these institutions that came together, and I was at the same time a state representative and the first standing member of the legislature to sit on a committee like this. So I wore two hats, one for the city under Mayor Daley and one with the scope for the state. But what we were able to do with this biotech conference was it had this ripple effect that is still very present today. Showcasing to the world that Illinois and Chicago was the place to be for bio-life sciences then led to me as a state representative passing the angel investor tax credit, which has been leveraged to the tune of almost $400 million worth of investments. It's a $10 million investment from the state of Illinois, which was an offshoot of this biotech conference. And institutions like those you see right here, Jimmy would have had access when they were in the beginning stages of innovation and startups to be able to access these funds that the investors would get a 25% credit for, up to a 25% credit on their investment. And so this has led to what we now look at Fulton Market. It's booming with biolab space, right? We've got, I think it's 37,000 active openings for jobs in this market. There's 90,000 jobs that were created in the biotech space here in the Chicagoland area just because of this angel investor tax credit. And so the example of what a little investment from the state with a partnership in the private sector can do is monumental. I just met with Kate Timmerman with the Quantum Exchange. And so it's a perfect example of right now we're thinking future, quantum. These were the conversations we were having back in 2006. And so they happen every day. I wanted to highlight that example as an example that is still producing major benefits for what in fact was a pretty minor investment for the state of Illinois, but a critical one. So we are now in a position where financially we're moving forward. You can do business in Illinois, you can trust to do business in Illinois, and I am so excited because if we could get through these dark days and come out with the results that we have under pretty difficult challenges, there is no challenge and no opportunity that we're not ready to seize as a state. I'll leave it there for now.
Very well said.
Thanks.
Thank you. And so I think we'll just pick up on a lot of those themes to the rest of the conversations. I think what you've heard from the three panelists is a sense that this is a big moment for Illinois, that we're actually able to play some offense, and it took hard work to get here. And it just so happens that it is also a great time to be ready because the federal government has decided to put $4 trillion of its own money on the table for people who can do public-private partnerships in these areas. So if you read the details of the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the infrastructure bill, they're essentially offering to be Illinois' co-investors in these big themes. And so that'll sort of be where I take some of these questions. There's actually a massive effort in Illinois called Innovate Illinois to make us so we all can work on seizing these areas together by tapping into $4 trillion. I'm excited to leverage that to help Illinois lead. And the four areas we're going to talk about as we go through this, the first is a lot of the investment in those three bills relates to workforce and STEM workforce, which inherently requires employers, universities, and the public sector to work together. We're a great place for that. The second that we'll talk about is in the biology and synthetic biology space, where again, Susana referenced big opportunities there. The third one is in quantum and advanced microelectronics. And the last one relates to EVs, batteries, and decarbonization. That's where someone has offered us $4 trillion, if we're willing to work together.
We're willing.
To underwrite what we do. And it just so happens that my guests here are going to be on the front lines of that. So I'm going to start by just picking through each of those and asking my panelists some questions. So as someone who runs an institution that, or helps lead an institution with a heck of a lot of those students, Can you just talk to me a little bit about your institution's efforts and what you're thinking and seeing as it pertains to preparing the diverse STEM workforce of the future? Where is Granger? Where is Urbana? What are the focuses? What is the progress they're making? Just give us a bit of an overview of where those things stand and where you're headed.
So it's a great question, and also I think, like you said, this is a very unique time, a very opportune time. So we're just really proud that in terms of applications to our college, they are record high. Actually, applications to our university, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, are actually record numbers. In our college, we just admitted this year 2,050 first-year students, which is the largest class ever. Last 4 years have been larger than ever before in terms of the incoming class of just engineers and computer scientists. We now have about 11,000 undergraduates in our college, just our college. We're one of the largest in the country. If not, Georgia Tech and us can compete who's larger, but the goal is to be obviously who's the best. So, but we are excellence at scale. And we have about 6,000 graduate students just in our college, so 17,000, 18,000 students, engineers. And I would say that there is really no major barrier, so to speak, to increase the numbers from the input perspective. We have a lot of applications, very strong applications. It's a matter of capacity, facilities on campus, and making sure that obviously we provide the best experience to anyone that enters the doors. We have many programs, and I'll just mention a few, where the focus is exactly that. I think that how do you provide opportunities to those who have the talent, who have the aspiration, but didn't get the opportunities in the past, right? So that's just really important, and that's a big challenge, right? How do you do that at scale, right? And I'm really big on preparation. I think we need to work more with our high schools, especially with high schools from different parts of the country, different parts of the state, especially different parts of Chicago, so that students can be prepared. They can be prepared for the STEM careers. If high schools don't have, if the students haven't taken calculus, they're not going to be prepared to come to an engineering degree. So we have a program, for example, we call Arise, which is students come in and then they spend a year sort of getting prepared, then so they can be successful through the rest of the curriculum. But we have many such opportunities and programs, and what I would say is that we're also really making a concrete effort to connect our college with Chicago and with the rest of the state. So we recently opened up our pathway programs. So this is, I'm also a big believer of supporting community colleges. Those are really important to providing the first 2 years of education at scale. We have to find out how to partner so that we can all sort of rise together. It's not us against anyone, it's together. So we actually recently opened up the pathway program to all the community colleges in the state. Prior to a year ago, it was only with like 12 community colleges. Now it's open to any. So as long as, so we work with them, we tell them what is required, what criteria the students have to meet, and if they meet that, then they can actually get a degree from Granger Engineering. Workforce development is critical, so we're working actively on that. One of our programs I'll mention that's here in Chicago we're really proud of is the City Scholars Program. I don't know how many of you have heard about that, but everyone, in terms of in the corporate world, because to keep one of the related questions is how do we keep more students here? Somebody asked me earlier, you're admitting all these students and they're going out to the coasts. Well, they're going out, where the jobs are, right? And we need to work together and create more opportunities for them here. But part of the intention and the strategy behind City Scholar Program was to have them work with companies while they're full-time students. So now these students come to Chicago, our faculty come up here and teach them, so they're full-time students, and they do these extended internships. And the goal is to build affinity. Then maybe when the companies get to know them, they give them offers, and then hopefully they can stay. So I think in terms of bringing talent to the universities, I think we can even bring more students. We can grow even more computer scientists, and we have one of the largest computer science programs in the country. One of the best, top 5. We have all of our programs, pretty much all of them are top 5 ranked. So we can bring talent, we can train them, and then also we're working hard on connecting them to industry and providing them experiences during their undergraduate programs. So this one in Chicago, the idea is that these are third-year and fourth-year students, and hopefully we can keep more of them here. And we work together to bring more companies here. Another program I'll mention, this is connected to this whole microelectronics effort, which I know we'll talk about. We're gonna, I think you're probably the first ones to hear it more publicly, but Monday we're announcing a program with Samsung. So these are companies, Samsung headquarters is in Austin, in the US, but they're doing their first workforce development program for microelectronics with our college in Illinois, in Urbana, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea is that they, thank you. The idea is that they would be they are providing scholarships to students. We have created a semiconductor minor, which again cuts across the college. Because also one other thing about the workforce, for example, in microelectronics, is that it's not that jobs would be the prior factory jobs. These are highly automated facilities. These facilities have robotics and sensors and Internet of Things. So you need to also train these workers in new ways. So we've created some new programs. And this program would be that Samsung would pay for scholarships, and in return, the students have to go work for Samsung, for example. So I think these are just some examples. But there's a lot of exciting things going on, and I'm sure I'll think of more during this thing, and I'll say it again.
Well, and I just want to emphasize the City Scholars Program as an example of something we all can do. So yes. If you are here representing an employer and you haven't fulfilled your civic duty to take some of the smartest 21 years old in the country and give them an opportunity to work for you here in Chicago. Thank you. If you step up to that civic duty, you can actually help solve a really important talent problem that you all have already invested in making it easier for us to do.
And one thing I can mention before, we also started our Masters of Computer Science program here in Chicago. So the idea was we're kind of limited on space and capacity in Urbana. While we look for more support from the state to build more facilities there, we thought we need to also build a strategic, high-impact presence in Chicago. So this is currently at the DPI facilities over not very far from here on Weck Drive. And the students are coming here and doing full-time Masters of Computer Science. They started this past spring. And then the idea is that these students then can also be doing capstone projects and connecting with industry with similar ideas as City Scholars, but now at the master's level.
Thank you. Jimmy, fair to say you are leading an employer of the future. None of our grandparents worked in sustainable aviation, but our kids probably will. And so that must create some really interesting workforce opportunities and challenges for you. And what is it like to have to think about that, building a workforce in an industry that really hasn't existed for very long? And how do you make sure everyone gets brought into that it doesn't just turn into employment for a select few set of folks? So just tell us, what's it like to have to build a diverse workforce in an industry that could be 1,000 times bigger 10 years from now?
I would start by saying that I think the younger generations, frankly, have a stronger sense of purpose about them in terms of wanting to take action to address broader societal issues that we're all experiencing. So there's an element of helpfulness here, which is our company is oriented towards doing good, right? A lot of what we do is for the greater good. That creates a very strong connection with younger generations and folks that are early in their careers. It also creates a bit of stickiness, right? That sense of purpose and our alignment to that mission has folks sticking with us, right, through all of the evolution that we go through as a younger company and a high growth company. As you know, it's not easy building a new company and building it in a new industry. You have issues that you're dealing with all the time that you're having to overcome. And having that strong sense of mission orientation, strong sense of purpose, actually helps connect folks to that journey that you're on at the end of the day. For us, I might have had 3 employees and I had 6 or 7 interns in the office. That was sort of the balance that we struck in the early days, partially because we believe in sort of giving opportunities to folks early in their careers and exposing them to highly technical opportunities as well. One of our folks who works for us is actually spent his first 2 years at Oakton Community College and is transitioning to U of I to complete his degree in engineering. So it's sort of an example of how that actually does in practice work. We've hired tons of interns that come from all sorts of schools here in Illinois. Just on my drive in this morning, I live north of the city. I probably passed by 5 colleges on the way in. It's an incredible asset that we have in this city and in the state that we need to tap into. We tend to hire a lot of chemical engineers. That is the bread and butter of what we do. Is we're an engineering and technology company that does really complex work, right? We take molecules and we transform them into a drop-in fuel so that we can decarbonize sectors. You need a lot of really bright folks that have highly technical degrees to do that work. Chicago, surprisingly, actually has been a very good spot for us to land the company and recruit folks with that talent. We're also building a team down in Houston, partially because we're not getting enough of that talent coming into Chicago, because as has been said, they're oftentimes going to the coast or going to the south, where you have a very strong refinery industry where a lot of these skills are used. So we also find it to be portable, right? So we try to actually leverage folks that have the experience to help and grow the talent in locations where we operate. What we're all doing and what we're experiencing is really another industrial revolution. And hopefully we get to talk about that a little bit because of what's happening globally in developing new industry as we pivot as a global society. For us, we also build a lot of these biorefineries in rural communities. And think about the impact that has in taking economically depressed areas and bringing and breathing life into them, really. In our plant in Georgia, it's in Soperton, Georgia. It's an hour and a half west of Savannah, 2 hours south of Atlanta, really in the middle of nowhere. And we've built the world's first biorefinery of this sort in that small little town. Yeah. We've brought in some talent from Illinois and places like Texas and Alabama to get it going, but the majority of the team there has been hired locally. So the opportunity it creates for local communities to upskill, to have viable, livelihoods, if you will, over the long term, is pretty incredible. And we do that in all communities around the world. We have a project here in Illinois. It's right outside of Hennepin, Illinois, with a company called Marquis. Great, company. It's logistically one of the best spots in the country in terms of its association with the Illinois River, affiliation with railroad and that sort of thing. But it's in the middle of nowhere, right? And again, we're building a biorefinery in partnership with Marquis that can attract talent and help upskill talent that's there locally. So we try all sorts of things, right, to sort of figure this out. And frankly, a personal story a little bit. I met my wife in Virginia, in DC, when we were both there. She's a local Virginian. When we moved to Chicago in 2007, it was tough, right? She was like, why would we leave the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic and move to Chicago? I happened to bring her here on a day that was like today, and it was a Cubs game. It was beautiful. It actually worked out really well. But if you think about what Chicago has to offer in terms of, and Illinois more broadly, in terms of sense of place, sense of community, opportunities to grow careers, opportunities to raise families, you can't replicate that in many other places. And when we were setting up the company, we had a choice. I could have said, I'm going to go down to North or South Carolina and start up the company. We decided to start it here. We're up in Deerfield along Lake Cook Road near the expressway, and it hasn't failed us, right? We have a great thing going here in the state and great talent and a great business.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having your business here in Illinois. We need more of that.
We need to get you more engineers.
Yes, we do. I think we're getting business done up here. I like this. Well, and I think it's a great segue, Susana. If you could talk a little bit about, there were 2 themes in your opening comments, private-public partnership and scale. And maybe talk about how those 2 things come together in workforce, and maybe give an example or 2.
Yeah, well, I would think that, again, going back to the bio example, I used bio because obviously I'm intimately aware of what that project ended up becoming, but also because I was thinking about it in the context of quantum, right? So quantum is the future, but that future is being built right here in Illinois. And so you think about the fact that most people don't know anything about quantum, And that's totally okay, because we have some of the brightest minds in the world right here in Illinois, positioning Illinois to be the leader when it comes to quantum technologies. Those were the same kind of conversations that we were having about biotech many years ago, when it was just kind of a pipe dream to showcase Chicago and to think, could this be a city that leads in that space? And clearly, it is and continues to be. And every day there's new developments in this field. So the biotech of 20 years ago is different than the bio of today, right? And so it's still considered an emerging technology. And so just being on the cutting edge and on the leading edge of these technologies is important, but it's really important to not do them in a silo, right? To not do them in a silo. That those needs are being addressed at the academic level. And I think one of the areas where Illinois, and I mean no disrespect to you, Dr. Bashir, with this, but just this is my personal opinion. I feel that for many years our academic space was purely focused on academia, right? They weren't thinking entrepreneurial. So they were thinking we're gonna like educate a whole bunch of people and they're gonna be very smart, but not thinking that these students that we have right now who are 21 could be thinking about how do they start their own business with the education that we're giving them here at this facility. And then how do we scale that up and grow it and create an economic opportunity right here in our state, because everything's there. The students are there. The talent is there. So what you would see, and I don't want to use Silicon Valley as necessarily a good example, but you saw a lot of young talent go off and like change the world. You know, some for good, some for not good, but the point is we had a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on there because they looked at, their academics looked at it a little bit differently. They looked at it as opportunities for creating jobs and businesses and growing massive wealth and influence. It goes back to the point for me that Illinois is a state that is perfectly situated to be the economic power player in the country. I think we've underestimated ourselves for a long time, and we haven't frankly invested in ourselves in a way that keeps us on the cutting edge and on the leading edge of whatever that new emerging market is. So I'm going to keep coming back to the quantum issue as a perfect example of this is a good example that we are thinking the future. There's no reason why Illinois shouldn't be the mega power when it comes to quantum computing, whether it's computing or it's the communications aspect of it. There's multiple buckets in the quantum space, but we should be leading on all of them because we have the infrastructure here in place to do it, most importantly, the human capital to be able to do it. And if we can connect the dots of getting the state or cities to invest, local and state to invest and leverage federal investments to keep those projects here and build them and grow them here and educate our students for those emerging technologies and not the things of the past, those are all the dots that have to be connected by all of the players in this public and private space. It can't just be one private entity saying, oh, we're gonna be like the innovators of the future with no help from the state or communication as to how we make that happen. So I was thinking about it kind of jokingly, but it's kind of true. I feel like a lot of our leaders weren't really good at that game. You know, when you're in a restaurant, there's connect the dots, right? That little picture that comes to life when you finish connecting the dots. I love that game. And I think more people need to think about, this is not super complex stuff. It's just communication, connecting the dots, and understanding that even a minor investment can have a major impact if you're willing to think about the future and not just worry about what's the right now, right? We need to do a better job of innovating as a state and as a partner with the public entities that we have, with this incredible, super smart human capital that we have, but not continue to operate in the silos that I think many administrations have fallen under, but to think about how can we ourselves innovate not just in the private space, but also in the public space, and think about how we do things quicker, more efficiently, and more effectively, right? And I think that you can deliver on those things even if you're government. We should strive to be doing things better, faster, and at lower cost. Those things are possible, but they don't happen by themselves. So I don't know if that made any sense, but I feel this is how I think about stuff every day. How can we make it easier for a business who's in an emerging market to not have to jump through 1,000 hoops to get a permit or to get a minor investment, or to, if there is an opportunity for investing in a bucket of, taxpayer dollars that's going to have like whatever that return on investment is going to be in the future. We've got plenty of examples that show that when we invest in emerging tech, it's a big payoff for us. So having these conversations, and don't just stop at a conversation, but actually putting them into action from a legislative perspective and from a leadership perspective is a good thing. This $2 billion investment wouldn't have happened without Governor Pritzker really trying to make it happen, right? And wanting to make Illinois a leader in the EV space. So it takes like that kind of forward vision to put these things in action. But again, it's just a matter of communication and connecting those dots.
Well, that's very helpful. And I think if I think about where we've gone so far, we've really talked about our journeys to get here, the context where Illinois can go on offense, and having the workforce to make it happen. With the time that we have left, I'm going to do a bit of a round robin. I think there's an opportunity to leave you all with two really big ideas on where Illinois is going to change frontier industries, and one closing remark on why we should all be investing in Illinois. And so I'm going to start with the big idea number one, and it's with my dear friend Rashid. And this relates to the most fundamental question being asked by the White House right now, which is how in the world are we going to solve the next 15 to 20 years of the semiconductors we need, and what that means in our competition from China. And you, with partnership from others, have put together an idea that is being heard directly by the Commerce Department and the White House on behalf of your colleagues in Illinois, affectionately called Beyond Silicon, that is understood to be one of the most differentiated ideas and how Illinois can actually lead the semiconductor era. Can you talk a little bit about that, where we are, what it might mean? Like, get us excited about how Illinois is going to move us beyond silicon into the next generation of computing.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think this is something really exciting and really timely and important. As you know, the CHIPS Act, Chips and Science Act, aims to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. for microelectronics and chips. Chips are at the heart of everything. This year, I don't know how many of you knew, but this is the 75th anniversary of the transistor. And the inventor of the transistor, Professor John Bardeen, was at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. One of the few people ever in history to have won 2 Nobel Prizes. So it wasn't the first time, wasn't a fluke. It was the second time. One was for transistor, for work he did at the Bell Labs, but then he came over to, and he taught the very first semiconductors class ever in the country, in the world, at Urbana, in our state, in Illinois. So we have a tremendous history of sort of innovations there. And then the inventor of the LED, the visible LED, right? So that was Professor Nick Holoniak, right here. So we've had these amazing people and amazing things come out in electronics. So 75 years ago, they probably couldn't predict, or maybe they could predict, I think, where we would be. But maybe we all couldn't predict what the impact of it would be. And the question is, what's next, right? So the need for computing is going to continue. We're generating more and more data. And it's actually also becoming rather unsustainable, from chips to warehouses, right? So how do we do it in a very sustainable fashion? We need to be thinking about new materials, new devices. So as we say, how do we go from bits? Bits are the digital bits that are powering your devices that you are right now using, taking pictures and other things. So how do we go from bits to qubits, as you mentioned, quantum? So this idea of beyond silicon is that whatever will come beyond silicon has to be interfacing and integrating with today's world, which is actually really based on silicon. And this will not go away. But we got to be thinking about not just bringing manufacturing here to catch up, but rather leap ahead. All of these innovations that the world is benefiting from really came from the United States. And I think you all should be proud. Many of them really came from Illinois, from Urbana and around the state. So, but then the benefit has been everywhere else, and of course here and everywhere else. So how do we continue to leap ahead? And so beyond silicon is about thinking, how do we get bits to go further? How do we do more high speed? You want higher speed communication. You want high power, high voltage communication for EVs that is also very sustainable. So how do we create chips based on silicon? It needs new materials, and we have the expertise here in the region. That's another, again, I want to reemphasize, right, with University of Chicago, Northwestern, UIC, IIT, UIUC, Argonne, and Fermi. Imagine if we can pull these resources together. This is the most powerful group of scientists and engineers, and the most inclusive group, I would say, in the country. So that's the idea, is that you bring together our expertise in Illinois, one of the very few states, if not the only, that has 2 national labs, that has all of these great universities. And if we can break down these boundaries and come together, we can be thinking about how do we not only continue to push the trajectory of silicon. So beyond silicon includes silicon, but then into quantum. And quantum systems are going to have to interface with existing systems. Quantum computers are going to have to interface with microelectronics and chips and the silicon of today to function, right? So quantum computing is going to be a very important piece of the future, but there's going to be other types of technologies as well that are going to be addressing the needs that we need for computing and AI. So from bits to qubits, and then also thinking about biology. So bits to qubits to neurons. The fact of the matter is that one of the most powerful supercomputer is about the size of an apple, and it runs on sugar. And that's in your heads. That's a brain, the human brain. There are still things that supercomputers cannot do that a human brain can do, still today, right? So we got to be thinking about computing with biology as well, and how do we now. There's already work happening about how do we actually build biological processors with living neurons. There are centers and grants and funding on that. So beyond silicon is about bringing manufacturing back to the US, partnering with the corporate sector, with the state government, with the federal government, in this case, obviously from Department of Commerce, but then thinking about how do you also leapfrog. So we don't want to be just playing catch up, which is very important to bring manufacturing back to the US. Critical, but as we do that, let's also think about how do we go beyond silicon.
Well said. All right. So stay tuned for that one, because we are, fair to say, we're trying to convince the country that this is the place that hard problems should be solved together.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's kind of another big idea called maybe our entire transportation and fuel industry should work a different way. And that it isn't about taking things out of the ground in the middle of Texas or Russia or something, and maybe we should take garbage and municipal waste and feedstock and all these other things. And so, Jimmy, we've asked you about your background and some of your workforce needs, but just talk to us about what LanzaJet's vision is for like really reimagining transportation and moving us beyond carbon. So if Rashid is moving us beyond silicon, how are you all moving us beyond carbon?
Okay, how much time do we have? Literally,
The short version.
It's the short version of it.
Because Susana's got a good close too.
We can sit here today, and it's a pretty day in Chicago. And if you think about what's happening in other parts of the world, there's wildfires galore, flooding that's happening. Circumstances that I think countries and cities haven't seen ever, right, in their history. So there's an opportunity for us to truly do something about climate and the issues that are being created with man-made emissions. Aviation is a phenomenal example of an industry that globally has come together and said, we want to decarbonize. And think about all the airlines around the world. Think about the nation states that actually own some of these airlines. You really have a lot of players in a global map that need to come together and sort of come to agreement on this. Airlines did that. Airlines took it to the United Nations, which also manages aviation emissions globally, and sold that to the UN as a decarbonization strategy for the sector. So airlines and aviation as a whole has agreed to decarbonize by 2050. So let's put that into context. So airlines globally today use 100 billion gallons of fuel made from crude oil. 100 billion gallons.
Oof.
So, there are near-term goals, 10% by 2030 to get to a place where by 2050 we're decarbonized. Airlines have a couple of things they can do. They can buy new planes, they can replace engines, they can fly their airliners differently, or they can replace the fuel. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen, which is exciting. The reality is hydrogen aircraft are not going to be part of our dynamic anytime soon, right? 2040, 2045 and beyond is what Airbus and Boeing are suggesting. You have electric planes. Those can work, small distances, short distances rather, small planes. You might see that come into our operation. But by and large, you have these assets that have a livelihood of 35, 40, 50 years around the world. You want those assets to continue to operate, and how do you do that sustainably? So drop-in sustainable fuels is the answer that everyone has gravitated to as solving this. What that means is you replace the fuel that's made from crude oil out of the ground with stuff that comes from renewable sources. And it's key for it to be drop-in. So you use the exact same infrastructure, you use the same engines, same aircraft. It has the exact same properties as crude oil does, but it doesn't come from crude oil. And that's what we do, right? So we have 13 years of R&D work. It actually started in the US National Lab, in the Pacific Northwest National Lab. And we've taken that technology, scaled it up over 13 years, and are now deploying it commercially. So out of Chicago, we're actually doing work in places like India and Japan, Australia, New Zealand, UK, Europe, and so on, all out of Illinois and out of Chicago, which is pretty phenomenal in and of itself. But to get technology to work using renewable sources, not easy to do. Lots of companies have failed on this journey to actually be able to do this. We are doing it, and that's the good news here, right? Is our technology works, our business model works, and we are doing it. We can do it from anything, really. So one of our investors is a company called LanzaJet, worth mentioning them for a second. They're a biotech company. They take waste carbon, so carbon coming out of a steel mill that gets flared or gets sent into the atmosphere. They convert that into ethanol. They can take municipal solid waste, our trash, gasify it, make it into ethanol. As long as we can make anything into ethanol, we can take that ethanol molecule and transform it into a drop-in fuel with our technology. So all of a sudden, we're creating all sorts of sources across the globe to create new fuel from renewable sources. So instead of pulling new carbon out of the ground, we're recycling carbon that's already on Earth to create new fuels. And this actually works. It's happening commercially today. And that's what's caused LanzaTech to now be a publicly held company, one of the Times 100 most admired companies, all those things. And we're building our company to be on a similar pathway. So we're doing a lot to decarbonize aviation, but to get to 100 billion gallons is going to take us time. But you also can see this as it's an economic development opportunity for communities and countries around the world. It's a national security issue for some countries. Countries that depend on oil coming in from others can now create their own sources of fuel. And that is pretty powerful for countries who want to maintain their independence, their own security, and so on. So I'm super excited, by the way, that we're in this business. And to give the state of Illinois some credit, what Illinois has done, which has been a first in the country, is they created a tax credit for airlines using sustainable aviation fuel, using taxes that airlines pay for the use of fossil fuel. So that has been an incredible opportunity that actually helps to get this industry moving forward. And Illinois has led the way on that. So things do work in Illinois, I think. And what you're seeing from some of the examples given here around collaboration, it's really changed quite a bit, I would say, in the last handful of years, whether it's quantum, whether it's sustainability, biotech, lots of examples. And there's phenomenal work happening here across public and private sectors, and exciting to be part of that journey.
The CC BioHub is another example.
Yeah, Dean Bashir was just mentioning the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub just down the road, which was an astonishing win against 40 plus other 58 other places. So there you go. And I will say that I'm just obsessed with LanzaJet and your sort of partner investor LanzaTech. And when my kids ask me what did I do today, explaining that I talked to somebody at a company where some of his colleagues and investors can turn waste into Lululemon fabric, which is I understand like an actual use case.
Yeah.
That is a pretty cool story. And that's part of what you and your colleagues and your extended affiliates can do, which is pretty amazing, and at the scale that you're describing. Susana, I wonder if you could bring us home. One of the things that we talked about in our preparation was really the hard question of, all right, I get it. So you got some quantum research, you got you turn in some feedstock into some fuel, great. But why, or should we be confident as business leaders and entrepreneurs and other civic participants to invest in Illinois? Should we? Why should we? Like, how do we know now is the time? Maybe we've heard that before. Are you sure? Why?
Clearly, if you were a betting person, you should bet on Illinois. Don't bet against our state. I mean, we have, as I said, everything. What we didn't have was the fiscal stability and predictability. And I know that there's still, of course, this big issue about the unfunded pension liabilities, which some of you might be saying, yeah, it sounds good, you're paying bills and all this stuff, but what about the unfunded pension liabilities, which is, of course, the albatross that people worry about. But it's been called many times over a financial crisis, right? The pension crisis. And I would just say that I do feel that if there's one person in the state of Illinois who has earned the right to say that there's a difference between a crisis and a challenge, it's me. Because I did walk into what in effect was an absolute fiscal crisis, right? A $17 billion backlog of unpaid bills. And that's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It meant that businesses across Illinois went under, not through their fault, but because of our state's delinquency. It meant that people's entire livelihoods were wiped away. It meant that people who needed, whether it was a business for profit or whether it was a non-for-profit provider that was providing critical services to children with disabilities or autism, you name it, right? The state suffered through what in fact was a fiscal crisis. My first day on the job, I had to literally save the life of a woman who begged me to save her life because she was going to be disconnected from her life-supporting tubes and air 3 days before Christmas because the state had not paid her medical bills in over 6 months. And I remember clearly on 2 occasions speaking to the same gentleman who owned a business for over 28 years, who had double, triple mortgaged his home, trying to convince him not to kill himself because he was going to lose everything. Now, thank God he didn't. But that is a crisis, right? When we've owed people almost $17 billion worth of services that they rendered dutifully, we owed that money not 10 years from now, but 2 years ago, right? They were barely holding on, many couldn't. That's a crisis. The unfunded pension liability is a challenge. Why? Because not every single state employee is going to retire tomorrow. If they did, I'd be up here saying that's a crisis and it's a bad one. We should be freaking out, right? But not every single state employee is going to retire tomorrow. It's kind of like I try to kind of dumb down this issue and say, look, if you have a mortgage, and let's say your mortgage is $500,000, you're going to pay that over a 30-year time period. And you shouldn't take out the mortgage unless if you know that you can make your monthly payments and still sleep at night. You're going to do that for 30 years and you're going to own your home. But if the bank called you tomorrow and said, we changed our mind, you owe all $500,000 tomorrow, then you would be freaking out. So the pension situation, think of it a little bit more like that. Is it a crisis? No, it's a challenge, and we are smart enough to figure it out in this state how we need to go about addressing that challenge, but it's much different than having to come up with $17 billion when you only have $48,000 in your rainy day fund, which, by the way, today we have almost $2 billion. So we are on the right track. And right now is absolutely the time to do business in Illinois, and not just for today, but for future generations, to invest everything you have on putting your chips in the best market. And that's right here. We pay faster than the private sector. So whether it's you doing business with the state of Illinois or having the confidence to do business in a state that understands the need to be fiscally disciplined and have fiscal stability, either option is a good one. We haven't had that for many years. We have it now, and it's not just now, it's been consistent and predictable for several years now, which means that the credit rating agencies, who, trust me, do not hand out credit upgrades like candy. They've given us 8 now because they understand that we are in fact on this path to success. And when we talk about things like, you know, our microchips and semiconductor chips, all this kind of stuff, it's critically important that we produce those things here in Illinois. We've got every element, like I said, of that puzzle, every piece right here. And making sure that we learn from the pandemic not to be reliant on international trade. We were always going to have that, but we shouldn't be dependent on getting our baby formula from China or getting our microchips from China. We have to learn and leverage the fact that we have a great economy right now. How we leverage that for future economic growth is the million-dollar question, but I think we're ready, and we certainly have all the pieces to make that happen starting now. So if you know anybody who wants to invest, Illinois is the place. And Jimmy, we should keep talking about more sites in the state of Illinois.
Well, I'm incredibly grateful for the time the three of you have spent with all of us, and I would love to hand it back to my friend Margaret to bring us home.
Yes, I know we went a little bit over. Thank you all for sticking out. And if you do have more time, I encourage you to stay and connect with each other. Like I said, go outside. How inspired were you by this? I hope you all walk out of here with some swagger, being proud to be from Illinois. I mean, this is such a wonderful counter to so much of the negative press, and I know everyone in this room believes so deeply in this state and in this city, and we get frustrated when we hear all the negative press, which is why conversations like this are so critical. I want to thank every leader on this stage for everything that you are doing. I am deeply admirable of all of you. And each of you in the audience has a role to play. I mean, you heard them say it. You all have a little card about Innovate Illinois. Please check it out. City Scholars Programs. There are so many things you can do. And I want to give Brad and P33 a lot of credit for being those quarterbacks that are connecting the dots. So I know Brad would, if you have an idea, and you're like, I'm at my company, I don't know what to do. I know that Brad's team would love to hear from you. Every single one of you can be doing something. Talk to them. Also, our good friends at World Business Chicago, some of them are here too. So that's it. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.